Okay, so everybody, my presentation is on looking at climate change policy ambition, and basically I'm looking at that as a broader topic, but I'm studying Chinese efforts particularly to see if we can get some lessons from the Chinese case. And so, yeah, I'll make an introduction to the topic, and basically we'll talk about how we evaluate climate change policy ambition, and then we'll look at basically what's changed in China, and then we try to explain what has changed and basically what we can learn from the Chinese experience. And so the feel so far with dealing with climate change policy ambition is that there's a lot of political economy literature talking about ideas of what is the GDP per capita, how's the development, what are the interest groups at play within the state, how much do people know about climate change versus the normative side, which doesn't really talk with the political economy, and they talk about things like what is the normative salience, do people believe that it's a right thing to do to act on climate change? Are we responsible to make certain policies? And this idea that climate change is a real physical threat, but how we respond to it actually depends on a lot on perception and how that threat is perceived, as well as the literature right now focuses a lot on developed economies. We look at what does the European Union do, what does the United States do, what does Japan do, but we look very little in terms of developing countries like Brazil, China, India, and how they adopt more ambitious policies. And so if we want to arrive at, as humanity, at a feasible means of reducing climate change, we need to analyze climate change from a perspective of what do the developing countries do, because they are essential to making that progress, due to the fact that most of the future emissions are going to be coming from the newly industrialized countries. So to make that knowledge base and build upon what we know already, we need to look at a case that represents the speed of change that we need in the developing countries, in the countries like China, where it's an ideal case to look at. Because change in China has been fast, there has been a great amount of change from a non-actor to an actor that is taking leadership in the international stage. It is the biggest polluter, so it's important to look at China, and it's also a developing country, and we can look at China and gain lessons for the other countries like India, like South Africa, like Brazil. So when we evaluate climate change policy ambition, what are we talking about? It's not just a matter of emissions targets. These things are actually very fickle. If we talk about emissions targets, they are things that are proposed by politicians at international negotiations. They may or may not be followed up upon. So to judge a state's climate change policy ambition based on that one metric alone is a very poor way of doing that. And so we want to also look at credibility and long-term sustainability. And when we look at institutionalization and capacity building, that's actually likely to yield action. There is a good pattern of whether a country has a dedicated climate change institution, whether they have laws in place, and then we can judge based on that. They are much more likely to act on climate change. They are likely to follow up on their proposed targets and continue doing whatever they said they were going to do. So we need to look at whether it has dedicated institutions, whether there's climate change specific policies, whether there's climate pricing, and whether there's government investment in low carbon infrastructure. And going to the Chinese case, so my methodology was taking a process tracing approach, and I've conducted elite interviews in China to try and learn more about what had happened. And basically, the general gist of it all is that from 1992 to 2007, we had basically no climate change policy whatsoever. It isn't mentioned in any government documents, and then in 2007, we get our first document that you can see in terms of climate change policy being represented at the state level of there being a plan to do something about it. And from then on, China actually takes increased action around the 2010-2011 time period. It gets incorporated towards a 5-year plan. There's an office created in DRC to basically manage climate change, and it also becomes more of a national priority. But from the interviews, we get the sense that from 2013 onwards, there's a rapid intensification of pressure from the central government. There are more ambitious targets. There's the concept of peaking emissions. Carbon pricing is introduced. There is talk of a zero carbon economy by 2100. And basically from that point on, one of my quotes from one of my interviews is basically the central government on down to each and every agency, they are frantically working at the issue. It's become a high pressure from top to downwards. And so this is a very strange what had happened in those past few years. And when we look at it, it's a change in incentive structure, basically from international pressure and economic incentives. But this is what I really look at in my research, is the changing threat perception of climate change, and how public concern for air pollution has basically shifted climate change from a long-term uncertainty issue to a short-term certainty issue regarding how it impacts China. And so this type of diplomatic and economic incentive change can really explain what has happened from 2007 onwards to about 2013. So China becomes the biggest emitter of greenhouse gases, and because of that, there's increased international pressure, there's a heightened international profile. Chinese diplomatic efforts at Copenhagen to obstruct the agreement, and basically it was a very embarrassing moment for China, and they have increased international pressure from that. And it also becomes a bargaining chip because of the level of how China is viewed as an important player in climate change. It can get basically diplomatic brownie points by conceding on climate change and making contributions, and it gives them global prestige, and also it becomes a building block as US-China relations. It's a very important area of cooperation in a relationship that has recently become very fraught with various other problems. And on the economic side, throughout that time, the Chinese economy faces a increased capacity issue, that basically that there's too much capacity, that is outdated and inefficient, and all these commodity prices are collapsing. Steel, a major industry, is falling down. Cabbage is more expensive. You buy a basket of cabbages, it's more expensive than a ton of steel. The green economy also is one area they're looking to advance economic development and basically move China from this lower on the production chain to a high-tech, value-added economy, and also to use these processes of including carbon trading and all these other climate change policies to improve government administration. But what's really interesting is that in 2013 is where everything happened. And there's this great pressure to do more. And so when we're thinking about what happened there, we want to go look at basically in 2013, there's a bad month of smog, and there's a great rise in public pressure as well as public awareness into the problem of air pollution. And it becomes one of the most important issues in the Chinese public consciousness. And the way that China perceives climate change and how policymakers, and this is clear through the interviews, that when I talk to these policymakers, and these are people who work in the environmental industry, they really do not distinguish between the concepts of climate change and air pollution, even though they're distinctive processes. And if you talk to everyday people, it's even worse. They actually do not know what climate change is, and they just assume you're talking about smog. And so it becomes one of these issues where they become linked conceptually within the public. And because of that, when Chinese officials and figures talk about doing things about climate change, like this is from Jack Ma talking at the Paris Climate Change Conference, and his speech was about how when I see smog in Beijing, I really wish I was an alien so I can get out of Earth. It has basically had nothing to do with the fact that the Earth was getting warmer. And so this is how people look at climate change in China. And because of that, we have this implication that now in China, climate change is hazardous to your health, and taking action on climate change means a better life in your immediate future. And because of that, we have this confluence of energy, ignorance and synergy, motivating policies that have more ambition because people don't know how it works, and this coupling has reduced what is basically this kind of uncertainty and assessment that climate change is something that is so far away and we don't have to deal with it now. And it's basically transformed this kind of informational perception within policymaking. And there's also a bureaucratic opportunism that takes advantage of this to push for more advanced policy. And this is why we're seeing more ambitious policy on the part of China, because NDRC officials are thinking, well, everybody's worried about air pollution, we basically tack on the climate change policies onto that, and then we can have this infrastructure for climate change policy, and even when we resolve the air pollution problem, then we get climate change policy that will continue because of this existing infrastructure. And the implication is that climate change action as done on as it's done right now is too slow, and for there to be timely action to prevent runaway climate change, there is a need for getting the poor countries to act more, and there's an opportunity that developing countries have terrible environments. Because if we think about how climate change arrived at first, it came later. When all these developing countries dealt with their air pollution problems, it was the 1950s, and nobody knew climate change existed. And because of that, there was a great opportunity that was missed, but this is now the case with developing countries, and these two issues can be linked. And potentially investigators, I would like to investigate this more to see if there's avenues in other states, like India, for example, to push climate change policy with the air pollution perspective. And linking current events is a good cognitive shortcut to get people to act even if they don't care about the environment. And taking advantage of coupling, working with people more concerned about pollution is the best way to go about this. Basically, what the problem is that trying to further knowledge about climate change actually doesn't really help. My research has shown that belief in whether climate change is real alters very greatly depending on the political climate of the country, so it doesn't have much staying power. And all it does, even if they understand what climate change is to create this long-term threat. But for things like air pollution, you can feel it, you can smell it, you get headaches, and so it's much easier to motivate action on that front. And it's not exactly an original idea either. There's when the Paris Peace Conference was going on, Arnold Schwarzenegger released this Facebook note talking about, I don't give a damn if we agree about climate change, and try to emphasize things on how we should be doing more to avoid climate change because of the air pollution issue, and how burning fossil fuels is bad for people's health. And that is also an approach that is taken in developed countries, and maybe there's an avenue for more action there as well. And so the issue with climate change is that if everybody lived on the Maldives or Tuvalu, these island countries that are sinking, we wouldn't have this problem as it is right now. However, that's not the case. But with this air pollution and climate change conceptual link, it might be possible to resolve the problem much faster and essentially motivate action from the developing countries and the newly industrialized countries to see, by linking this problem, to make it a short-term problem that people are really concerned about, and to promote more action in the immediate course. And so that's the findings of my research, and I would like to open for comments and questions.